As faithful stewards, we don't drive by Braille reacting to the rumble strips of life and business. Just as eternity should shape and inform how we live today, long-term visioneering can inform and shape the way we plan for tomorrow, today. Now, we like to use this business as a ministry strategic planning framework to think about the business. And within that, there are these 5 critical disciplines or movements that are part of that planning rhythm. The first is to look in, to look inward at who we are as a company. This is where you answer questions about identity, mission, vision, values, culture. What's the dream? Why does this organization exist? Then you got to look back. You got to learn from recent results, recent history. How did the previous plan work? What are things that are happening? As one of my board members likes to say, I reserve the right to get smarter. So where do we need to learn and react to recent performance results? Of course, throughout the whole process, we should be doing deliberate efforts to look up. This is where you talk to the real owner of the business and say, hey, if this is God's business and I'm just a steward, it would make sense to consult the owner and ask, what does he think about the business? What does he like, delight in? What does he want to see different? What would matter to him? He kind of knows some things about the future. Then you got to look around. This is classic exercises of looking at market forces and factors and strengths and weaknesses and assessing the internal and external realities of the business that surface then opportunities or necessary actions. But I want to talk about the 5th exercise, and that's this idea of looking ahead. And this is where we start looking 1, 3, and 5 years out into the future, maybe even farther, and letting that shape the strategic objectives of our plan. Now, I realize planning for the future can be perplexing, and it could seem like an exercise in futility. I get it. In 2016, I took over this business and took our team on an offsite retreat, and we were going to do our first strategic plan. And the reality was we were missing a lot of data and information and the kind of stuff you'd want to have to build a confident plan. And so as we looked into the next 12 months, it was hazy. We were having a real hard time knowing exactly what to put on the board as what would happen or what needs to happen next year. So what do we do? Well, I was benefited greatly by a book I read by Bob Johansen called Future Leadership Literacies. And in it, he argues that 21st century leaders are going to need to learn some skills, grow some disciplines around how we think about business. And one of the things he said counterintuitively is, well, the next 12 months may seem uncertain. We don't know exactly what the economy will do any given month. We don't know the outcome of elections or which brands are going to emerge as successful or what new products may launch next year that affect us. True. But if we look farther out, 3, 5 years out, we actually know a lot more than we think. Will the world be more or less data-driven and digitally connected? More. Will there be, what will happen to the shifting demographics in the workplace generations? Well, we know that. What's going to be happening in your city or this country or this industry? If you ask big questions, well, you may not be able to say exactly who or what the brand will be. We actually know a lot about the future. And he'd say if you go to the future, you can look back at the present and begin to map out steps of what must happen to get you ready for that. And that's what we found helpful for us. So we went back and said, okay, if you think about 5 years out, and we think about, okay, 3 years out, we think about 1 year out, and go, okay, if we think about that future, and we begin to ask the question, what is going to be true in 5 years? Both what will be true, because it just will, and what do we want to be true? Think about this as being kind of the facts and the numbers. So we start going, well, in 5 years, how big will we be? How big do we want to be? What will that be in terms of volume or revenue, locations? We start thinking about people. Is there going to be succession, retirements, transitions happening? What's going to happen about targets and market positions we've got? So maybe there's things you've been aiming at or hoping for that we're going to finally achieve by that date. As we start thinking about the external and internal, the known and the desired things about the future, we got detailed even about the organization. We want to have grown our NPS and improved our workplace culture, and we want to have added all these things. It was pretty easy to go, yeah, that's what must happen then. But how in the world are we going to get there? Well, that actually, the clarity of the future is like a horizon light that shapes the way you craft the next steps. So we began going, well, if we're going to be that big, be that many places, have that capability, launch that product, be ready for that moment, then what must we deploy? What new things, capabilities, roles, products, what are the things that don't exist today that are going to need to be put into place in our business? Okay, to do that, what are we going to have to develop? We're going to have to build that. It doesn't exist. Maybe if that's a person, is that training and development? If that's product, is that beta testing? If that's a technology system, are we going to have to go source it and code it and prepare that? And again, as I said, we had more questions than answers. And so then the other reality is, what are we going to have to discover? What do we not know that we're going to need to know to do that? And we began to say, well, if that's going to happen in 5 years, this has to happen at least the year prior to that. Well, that's going to take a year of work. So that's going to happen here, which means, gosh, we've got a bunch of things we've got to start figuring out right now. Clarity about 5 years actually populated about 70% of the things that we suddenly knew we had to do next year. And so suddenly the combination of looking back and looking around with this looking ahead exercise began to bring a lot of clarity to what must happen next. And 5 years later, we accomplished over 90% of the things that we put in that box. Now, some of that happened in the last 18 months. Sometimes we had to learn and develop 3 times on some systems and some technology. We had to figure out things before we were able to deploy the right thing to set up the day. But we accomplished over 90%. We're currently in our 4th year of a new 5-year plan. Again, letting what we know must happen and will happen help inform what must happen next. Now, General Eisenhower famously said, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. Building a great business for a greater purpose is never going to happen by default, only by faithful design. The disciplines and competency of ongoing strategic planning is part of work as worship. It's part of business as ministry. It is part of good stewardship. It's necessary leadership.